And now moving on, we have an exciting panel on how can personalization achieve retention. And joining us for it are ghadah altalal, the Marketing Director at Tamimi Markets. Let's welcome her. Since joining Tamimi Markets in 2018, ghadah vision was to strategically localize the brand and convert Tamimi Markets to become a memorable destination to its TA, developing a strong team with 16 young local talented marketers. She managed to lead and implement a number of measurable and successful marketing initiatives, recording 2 major national recognitions for the brand on different spectrums. Also joining the panel discussion is Alastair Kilgour, the Vice President of the Middle East, Turkey, and Israel at Tealium. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome him. He serves as the Vice President of Middle East, Africa, Turkey, and Israel for Tealium, the largest independent and most trusted customer data platform globally. A third panelist for this discussion is Samrat Sengupta, the e-commerce and Omnichannel Director at GMG. Let's welcome him to the stage. He's a digital native. He's an experienced e-commerce leader specializing in strategic digital growth and team management. And of course, ladies and gentlemen, our moderator for this session is Abhinav Mishra. Let's welcome him back to the stage.
Thank you so much to all our panelists for joining this panel today. Thank you, Samrat. Thank you, Al. And thank you, ghadah. I think, ghadah, I'll start with you. The first question, and a very cliched one, a typical one, but I think we've seen a lot of change in the last 2 years, right? So what has it been like for you? How have you seen the consumer behavior change in the last 2 or 3 years? And what have your key takeaways been?
All right, so for us, as locals, specifically for Saudi Arabia, the transformation that happened not only due to COVID, but also the transformation in the country itself has massively changed the behavior. People were put, or the customers were put in a situation where they had to leave their comfort zone into something that gives them the luxury to review, experience, and decide where their loyalty is going to belong to. So it's no longer what I inherit from my parents or a friend recommendation. It's rather what I personally like. What I've seen in the change and those behavior changes, it has not only impacted the businesses, but also impacted the mentality and as I mentioned, the expectations. So as businesses, we're no longer at the stage where we can predict a certain behavior, rather than the only access we have is our data, is studying those data, redefine the segmentations that we have in hand, and then personalize. Because if personalization isn't part of what we do in a daily basis, we're actually losing our customers. And today I can comfortably say that it's, I'm not only looking for their loyalty, I'm just thriving for them to come back to the business. So it did impact the shopper behavior, but also impacted the brand's behavior. As a brand, we became much more cautious. We became realistic. So, and we are starting to look at it 5 steps ahead, not only to predict, but to also customize and use the right tools for it.
Thank you. Al, as ghadah mentioned, it's not only the consumer behavior that has changed, it's also the brands that have changed in behavior as well. And I'm looking for the same question for you, but your answer is going to be very interesting, because for you, you get to see, like, rest of them can speak from their brand perspective, how they've seen the behavior change. For you, you actually notice the behavior change in customers across a lot of your clients, right? So how have you seen the consumer behavior change in the last couple of years?
Well, first of all, thank you for including me in your discussion here this morning. It's a pleasure to be here. I thought those comments were very insightful, and actually, I would echo some of them in terms of the broader picture. Obviously, as we went through the COVID crisis, we saw people's behaviour change fundamentally to move online from what they had previously done. And that caught some people out who weren't quite ready for it because it came along as a surprise. Some other people were more mature and they were ready for it. And now we've come out the other side of that. We're kind of seeing an interesting scenario because now people are able to go back to the more traditional way of engaging with their brands, but they also have this legacy of this new online experience that they've become quite expert at during the COVID period. So brands are now really focused on how do we combine that offline and online experience to make the customer have a joined up experience of engaging with me as a brand. So, you know, in short, that's kind of the journey over the last kind of 2 years that we've observed globally.
Thank you so much. Samrat, I'm just going to take a cue from what Ghadah and Al mentioned. I'm going to, talking about the brand behavior change. And we saw that before 2020, brands concentrated a lot on acquisition. And now after 2020, it has been mostly talks about retention, right? But we've also seen retention become so difficult right now. Now, from your perspective, why do you think it has become so difficult and what can brands do about it?
I think absolutely right. So if in your strategy you don't really have lifetime value as a big metric, right? And you keep focusing on let's acquire users in the cheapest way possible, it doesn't really work, right? It doesn't matter if you spend $500 on a user as long as you can get them to come and shop more. So retention has become a key. The problem, however, is the user has become smart, right? The consumer, as everybody was saying, the consumer has moved online, especially the Gen Z and so on. They clearly know that they leave digital breadcrumbs, when they search something on Google or they book a cab, etc. So they expect some amount of what I call data responsibility from the brand, right? So if you do not use the data that you have contextually, it is, in my opinion, very, very difficult to retain the consumer today because they are connected, they are fast, they are very demanding. So users want you to talk to them the way, they want you to talk to them, right? So if for example, I don't have kids and then you say, show me a lot of ads for diapers, it doesn't really make sense. And given all of the brands, to be honest, have access to data, either being, first party or, consent-driven third-party hash data, it is super, super important that, they kind of unify the data together and talk to the user and segment the user as step number one and personalize as the final holy grail. Now, personalization becomes very, very difficult if you don't have the right infrastructure, you don't have the right, technology to support. And I think that's where, especially in this region, I see a lot of brands kind of now getting on the bandwagon, but it's a lot of sophistication has to happen in terms of the infrastructure and to be able to really contextually talk to the consumer.
I think, yes, and I think as you rightly said, a lot of them get onto the bandwagon. That's the right word. Al, as Samrat mentioned, he mentioned about personalization is difficult and it cannot happen without the right technology. And technology today has kind of given us an idea about what is achievable and what is possible. Now, how do you see technology empowering retention for brands? How do you see that?
So, also relating this back to the previous question and joining the two up, doing retention properly, I think, has always been difficult. I think that's not a sudden new thing that is landed upon us. Now, as far as technology is concerned, what you would do if, without technology in an ideal world, is you would go and speak to all of your customers individually. That would be the ideal way of understanding and what's going on with your customer and to be able to figure out what you needed to do to retain them as a customer. So what technology does is enable you to basically do that at scale. And what I mean by that is that your customers are constantly talking to you through their interaction with your brand. They're talking with you through how they interact with your web and how they interact with your app. There's also a tremendous amount of data that is available in the point of sale. So what becomes difficult is you've got all this data, you've actually got quite a lot of the data, it's all in different taxonomies, it's all in different silos. So how do you actually bring that all together so that you can listen to your customer properly, so you can understand, look, actually this is a guy who's engaging with us and he's behaving in a way that he is a high value customer. I need to invest in this person. and specifically target that person, as opposed to this other guy here who sits in the middle, who's neither one thing or another, or potentially use technology to listen to how people are behaving, to identify who has the propensity to potentially be leaving you, to churn. So, there's technologies out there like, as of course you would expect me to say, Tealium, that actually help you to go and lay down a really solid first-party data collection strategy across all those different customer touch points, that then puts you in a position where you can, at scale, listen to your customer and really understand who he is, and then go do something about it through activation and engagement.
Absolutely. So probably getting all that data unified and working for you as a brand. Ghadah, combining both the questions as Al did, why do you think that retention has suddenly become so difficult for marketers, or was it always a difficult thing, but it's just that brands were concentrating on acquisition at that point of time? And also, how has technology helped you to probably deliver better personalization and deliver better retention as well?
I believe one of the issues for retentions is the user has changed their stories, while the brand has stick to the same storytelling style. With that, you're just not giving the right content or relevancy to that customer. So today, again, going back to segmentations and identifying user profiles and the personas, and all of these things are still a basics in having or in granting retention. But retention at the end of the day is a cycle. And if you don't have the factor of a closed loop, you're honestly committing a suicide for the brand. And for us as a brand to be always there, or having that always on approach, we need to start the change internally. One of the factors that worked for me personally is I started hiring young talents, Saudis, in the department. Today I am they call me a feminist, but I don't know if I am. I have 97% females who are all Saudis. They're extremely young. We hired them as an intern, and then they ended up with a full-time job. The reason being is that those are my customers. They know exactly how a youngster will continue coming to Tamimi markets. How can I evolve with them with time? Because this youngster, one time she will become a mother, and then her needs will differ. But it's not necessarily, she's not copy-paste of her mother. So again, it's a cycle, and if we don't grant that closed-loop approach, we are just doing a simple marketing, or it's an obvious marketing, where you need to make sure that what retention is, in my opinion, is providing shopper happiness. And today, a lot of the brands are failing to do that. For me, to retain my customer is to make them always happy. And coming back with the feeling is, I love Tamimi Markets, which I really hope that you all share with me the same feeling. It offers me different products. It speaks to me. And what's more important, I feel cared for.
So, Ghadah, sorry, just a follow-up to, you mentioned a very interesting thing is about, at the end, it's about making your shopper, your customer happy. And you very importantly mentioned that a lot of brands are getting that fundamental value wrong. Do you think, apart from whatever you mentioned, is there anything that you feel fundamentally brands are doing wrong, something that they can correct, that can help them, make it easier for them to make their customers happy?
I think one of the biggest mistakes brands are doing is they're not looking at the long-term relationship and the value it generates with the customers. They do adapt a lot of technologies, but their issue is they don't know how to use it. They don't set a digital strategy. They don't understand what is their KPIs internally and externally. What I'm seeing, though, as a shift with a lot of the brands is that they're starting to mentally segregate what's in it for the business and what's in it as for the brand itself in the long term. So they use, again, I go back to the use of technology, which today I feel that we are overwhelmed as brands as in we have to use a certain technology, we have to reflect the VOC, but at the end of the day, we don't know how to use it. And if we don't know how to use it, we are just ticking the box. And we are, as we move on, we're losing more and more customers.
Thank you. Samrat, I think you and Ghadah mentioned the same thing about how brands are not concentrating on the customer value, lifetime value. But we're talking about personalization and retention. Let's also talk about engagement, right? What are the emerging technologies that you think brands or what you're using or the brands are using to probably drive that engagement? And what do you think? And here I'm going to ask you guys to be a bit of a, the crystal ball, predict something. So what do you think is going to be a game changer when it comes to emerging technology in engagement moving into 2023?
To be honest, I don't really have a crystal ball, but I'll try to answer that, right? But before we actually move into technology, right? I think engagement is pretty much driven by the product. When I talk about product, I mean the tech product you own, right? And I think what every brand has to understand that, you're not a retailer or you're not a bank. You have to become a technology player, right? You are a tech business, and then you're in a tech business of selling things or tech business in getting people's money, etc. Right? So that is the key, and then you have to drive product-led growth by adding as many use cases as possible, right? That's, I think, the key to engagement, and that's where you kind of you can take the personalization and the data that you have collected for users. So, for example, if somebody comes into your store or your or your app, etc., buys a yoga mat, you can and you definitely now know that this is somebody who's into yoga as a sport or as a well-being journey. And then you have to think, what other use cases can you draw out? And it might not necessarily be just selling them more stuff. It is about what can you help them in their journey. So, like, for example, GMG is aiming at becoming a global well-being company, and this is a use case we use quite often, right? Where we kind of try to draw parallels in terms of what information would the user need, what more content can we give, what are the other plethora of concentric circles, I like to call it, that we can sell them on. And I think that's where, to be honest, the key, in my opinion, is still any sort of technology which can help you unify your data. Without that, it won't really work. And especially in the region where you have a host of offline retailers who are now trying to do online as well, it is extremely important that you unify the store data and the online data, because the user wants to be treated the same way. The user does not really care if it's your website or your app or your store. And for example, if I buy a lot of orders from the app, I need to kind of feel that the store staff also knows me, right? So that is, I think, the key. And I think I haven't answered your question in terms of the exact tech, but I think unification of data, any tech that helps you do that.
But I think one very interesting point that you mentioned was about how you cannot just be a retailer, a bank today. You have to probably become a technology-based company and then build use cases and see what works or what does not work for you. Al, your suggestions on the same question?
Yeah, I wonder if you'll forgive me and give me a bit of license to go back to a point that Ghadah mentioned earlier on. I think that it's a really, really important point that was made about the use of technology and feeling obliged to use technology because that's what everyone else is doing, but not really understanding how to use it. I think that's an incredibly important point. And in that regard, in the topic that we're talking about, I think that one of the important things to do is to take a crawl, walk, run approach to how you look at your technology stack. And what we are seeing, people successfully working on retention and such like, is they lay down a solid foundation on the first-party data collection strategy and also attach that to privacy to make that first-party data privacy aware. If you do all the other fancy stuff, invest in all these other fancy technologies further downstream in the stack, but you don't have that solid privacy-centric first-party collection strategy, you're in danger of wasting a tremendous amount of money and time. So just to echo your point, start with the basics and lay down that solid first-party data technology foundation. To answer your question specifically about what we are seeing going forward for 2023, our customers who have a more, they're maybe at the run stage, if you like, of that crawl, walk, run strategy. What we're seeing them starting to look at is using machine learning and the like within our platform to try to help them do two things. It's kind of two sides of the same coin. What they're looking to do is to say, identify at scale using machine learning, who are my high value customers, what do they look like, and who else amongst my customer base would have the propensity to be a high value customer, that if I invested in them, I could convert them into one of those VIP high value customers. So using machine learning to be able to go and predict, what that audience would look like, and then invest your marketing dollars in converting these people into high value customers is a trend that we are seeing people looking at. But also in the same context with machine learning, on the other side of things, to get ahead of the curve, to look at the people who have a propensity to churn, right? So, help me understand in advance of them leaving me if they're behaving in a way that might cause them to leave, so that I can invest marketing dollars in them to keep them and to retain them. So machine learning is something we are certainly seeing people start to think about, and already, in many cases, already adopting.
A very fair point. I think machine learning to probably help, as you mentioned, help you understand exactly how you're, not only understand, but also predict how your customers are going to behave, who's important, who's not, and accordingly, probably you can segment them as well. Ghadah, one last question. Apart from Tamimi Markets, which are the brands that you feel are, it could be a global that you're a fan of, or are getting it right when it comes to personalization and retention, a brand that you might be a user of, any just...
Sure. When it comes to international brands, I think what I can usually relate to is Nike. I believe they address a demand, they address the feeling, and they address the need. So at the end of the day, they give you the option to always have them as your top of mind. They're doing it perfectly on digital. They're doing it perfectly in stores or brick and mortar or even online. So I feel that this is, I feel the relevancy. Yes, there has been a lot of other brands that tried to disrupt, but Nike remained the same, because I think they protected their legacy with being always evolving with the customers. From the local brands, surprisingly enough, I am a huge fan of entrepreneurs. The small businesses today, if you look at the coffee shops that opens in Saudi, which I make it a habit at least twice a week, I go to a new coffee shop opening. And the reason being, they teach you something about micro-segmentation. So today they understand what the neighborhood specifically wants, from both gender, from the different ages that resides in that neighbor. And they offer value, they offer local experience, which I don't have to go to Starbucks for. They're just making sure that they are framing me with the emotions I want to get in with. So, and I think one of my best is a local brand back in the Eastern Province. It's called Suwaj. Very simple. Every time I go there, the guy addresses me with my name and he says, "The usual?" And I'm like, "Yes, please." And he gives it to me with a 10 riyals, cost of a coffee. It became my preferred place, but I like still to go and discover more. If that's
absolutely. I think a very important point that you mentioned, we're talking about personalization. The example that you gave of local neighborhood cafes is exactly the personalization that all the big brands want to achieve, but what they're giving locally to their neighborhood as well, in terms
and just to add to that, I think the beauty of the local brands today is the simplicity that they provide. They don't overcrowd you with the different communication, but they're extremely simple in their approach. They speak exactly the language you want to hear.
I think that's a great observation. Samrat, what are the brands that you feel are getting it right, or you're a big fan of when it comes to personalization and retention?
So I've had the privilege of, obviously I run Nike's online business, so I've had the privilege of seeing firsthand.
That's why there was a big smile on your face when Ghadah mentioned Nike, right?
So I've seen firsthand how they use the data, and how, I think very importantly, I've worked in pure play e-commerce throughout, and it's not as difficult to do personalization online as it is to do it in store. And I think that's what I've learned personally from Nike Global, in terms of how do you turn your stores into experience centers and digitize and stitch all the online and offline data together. I've also had the privilege of working for Alibaba, and I think, to be honest, their technology and their data strategy, I think is world class. I've never seen anything better. It's like,
That's a first for me. That's the first time I'm hearing.
it's like a million. There's a saying, they have like a million app faces for a million consumers. So pretty much in their whole segmentation strategy, they had 11,000 different customer segments and 78,000 relationship nodes. And so on, and it was mind-boggling, but it helped me learn a lot. So I would always say that Alibaba, in my opinion, is the best at personalization.
Al?
Yeah, so if there's a few members of my team in the audience, and rather than at our booth, they'll probably have a chuckle at this. So I would say Marriott. They must be outside, they would have laughed. So I'm a passionate Marriott loyalty member. I have been for almost 20 years. And the reason for it is very, very similar to what Ghadah says. I feel they treat you like an individual. When I go into their app, the stuff they serve up to me in the app, they know is relevant to me. They don't send me spurious stuff that I'm never going to take advantage of. When I turn up to the hotel, the experience on check-in and such like is always highly personalised. They know when my birthday is, they know when my wife's birthday is, they know when it's our wedding anniversary. So when we check in, we don't have to ask them to do anything special. They just do that anyway. So for me, these guys just get it right. They just tick all the boxes.
I'm a big fan of Marriott Bonvoy as well, so yes, I agree with you completely. But thank you so much. We're at the end of time. Thank you so much for such a lovely discussion, for giving all the insights. I'm sure our audience enjoyed as well. And you know the ritual. Please give a big round of applause to our panelists on stage. Thank you so much, Ghadah. Thank you, Al. And thank you, Samrat, for joining us. Thank you.